Hello Year 13, back to remote learning. Before we start, today's poem is going to be Sub. I'm going to introduce the poem today and then we'll look at how it compares with Top Girls. So those of you who have got your poetry anthologies already, your feminine gospels, then you'll want to locate that poem for today's lesson. If you don't yet have a copy of the text, you might like to see if you can find the poem online and print off a copy so that you can annotate it as we go through the video. So we're going to start with our retrieval quiz. If you could start by pausing the video and working your way through the questions, spend about 5 minutes on this, off you go. Okay, so question 1, recall a quotation to demonstrate that Marlene is isolated. There's all number of quotations that you could use. One that springs to mind is, I believe in the individual, look at me, which indicates that she has quite an individualistic approach to life and that she prefers to be on her own. 2, is Marlene a likeable character? So again, this is quite an open question, so you might have slightly different responses. In my opinion, we're supposed to sympathise with Marlene and see her as a victim, really, of her time. That being said, her attitude towards Joyce, towards the other women in the employment agency, and things like that make her quite a dislikable character, which is unusual for a protagonist. 3, postmodern theatre raises questions rather than answering them. What question is raised in Top Girls? So I think the question that's raised in Top Girls is whether this new wave of feminism is liberating or limiting for women. So Marlene obviously has the freedom of choice over her career, and that positions her slightly more in a favourable way than characters like Joyce, who are limited by society's attitude towards working class women and how they have to stay at home and raise children, etc. But the success that Marlene experiences is quite limiting as well, because she doesn't have anyone around her. She's had to make sacrifices to get to where she is, and so we do get the sense that society isn't yet perfect. 4, name another way that Top Girls meets the expectation of postmodern literature. So you might have written about the non-chronological order of the text. You might have written about the non-naturalistic methods, particularly in Act 1, where you've got women from all different times in history, fictional women from literature and art, etc., all coming together at a dinner party. And then question 5 asks you to think further back to the Awakening, which was described as being too strong drink for moral babes. Why was it described like that? So lots of sources will tell you that it was censored and banned. That's false. People didn't like the text because it made them uncomfortable because of the character Edna's deviance from social norms. Okay, so as I said, today I'm going to introduce the poem Sub by Carol Ann Duffy, and we're going to seek to answer this big question by the end of the lesson. The big question is, what are the big ideas in this poem? What is this poem about? Why has Duffy written it? What does she want to assert about the female experience through this poem? So before I read the poem to you, I'm actually going to tell you the story of the poem because I think that will give us a better understanding as we read it together. So the narrator of the poem is a female that takes the place of a male in various different scenarios. She is Sub in major sporting events, historical events, and music and entertainment. Duffy makes lots of allusions as we go through 2 major historical events in these sectors. And the female narrator has to balance all of her achievements in all of these different sectors and big events throughout history with the struggles associated with the female body. Before we start again, I want to turn your attention towards the title of the poem, so Sub, because the title itself is of interest. Sub can be an abbreviation of substitute, which is a person who takes the place of another. It's a noun, but often in sport it's used as a verb. For example, we're going to sub this player for this player. But as well as being an abbreviation of substitute, as we're supposed to take it on a surface level in this text, on a deeper level, sub can also be a prefix, meaning under, beneath, or below. So this could be a criticism of women's place in society throughout history, how women have always been seen throughout history as the inferior sex and being under, beneath, or below men. So here's a poem. I'm going to read it to you first off. I'm going to read it in its entirety, and then we'll go through and have a closer look at the poem and collect some annotations. So, I came on in extra time in '66, my breasts bandaged beneath my number 13 shirt, and put it off the head, the back of the heel, and left foot from 30 yards out, hat trick. If they'd thought the game was all over, it was now. I felt secure as I danced in my dazzling whites with the cup tampon, but skipped the team bath with the lads, sipped my champagne in the solitary shower as the blood and soap suds mingled to pink. They sang my name on the other side of the steam. Came on too, in the final gasps of the Grand Slam's clincher. Scooped up the ball from the back of the scrum, ran like the wind, bandaged again, time of the month. Likewise wiggled, weaved, waved at the crowd, slipped like soap through muddy hands, liked that, slid between legs nursing the precious egg of the ball, then flung myself like breaking surf over the line for the winning try, converted it, was carried shoulder high by the boys as the whistle blew. They roared my name through mouthfuls of broken teeth. Ringo had flu when the Fab Four toured down under. Minus a drummer, the gig was a bummer till I stepped in. Digits ringed, sticked, skinned in a Beatle skirt. Mop top, fringed, to wink at Paul, quip with John, climb on the drums, clever fingered and thumbed. Give it 4 to the bar, give it yeah, yeah, yeah. The screams were lava, hot as sex, and every seat in the house was wet. We sang Help, Day Tripper, Money, This Boy, Girl, She Loves You, John, Paul, George, and moi. It was one small step for a man, for Neil, to stand on the moon, a small hop for me to stand in for Buzz, bounce in my moon suit over the dust, waving a flag. I knelt, scooped out a hole in the powdery ground, and buried a box with a bottle of malt chocolates. Emily Dickinson's poems. Ground control barked down the line. Houston, we don't have a problem, I said. It comforts me now, the thought of them there, when I looked at the moon. Quietly there on the moon, the things that I like. And when Beefy fell sick in the final test, I stepped up, 2 of his boxes over my chest, and hooked a 4 from the first of Lily's balls. He bowled so fast that you could hear his fingers click as he spun off the steam. I lolled at the crease, 5 months gone, and looped and hooped them about like a dream. Googlies, Bosies, Chinamen, Zooters, balls that dipped, flipped, nipped, whipped at the wicket like bombs. I felt the first kick of my child, whacked a century into the crowd. Motherhood then kept me busy at home till my girls started school. Not much bit, I was talked into management when Taylor went, caretaker role. Jacked that in after the World Cup win. Beckham free kick in extra time, and agreed on a whim to slim to the weight of a boy, ride the winner at Aintree, Bobby Joe 99, when the jockey dislocated his neck. After that, I pulled right back, signed up to write a book of my life and times, though I did play guitar for the band in LA when Bob gave me the call. And when I look back, or when my grandchildren ask me what it was like to put Muhammad Ali on the deck when Cooper was scratched from the scrap, or stand in for Graham Hill to be Formula One Grand Champ in the fastest recorded speed, or to dress up as Borg in bandana and wig and steal the 5th set at Wimbledon from under, you cannot be serious, McEnroe's nose, or to kneel, best of all, first woman there on the moon, and gaze at the beautiful faraway earth, what I think to myself is this. Okay, so let's have a closer look back through the poem and let's make some annotations on what we find. So the first thing I want to draw your attention to is the beginning of stanzas 1 and 2. I came on and came on. So came on there seems to have a double meaning. So it means that she came onto the pitch, she was substituted on in place of another player. But its secondary meaning seems to reference the fact that she came on her period. As we know from the start of the lesson, this is a poem about coping with the female body as well as achieving success. The reference in stanza 1, in Extra Time in 66, is to the 1966 World Cup final where England played Germany and won. That was the only World Cup that England won as well. And so that's the allusion to a time in history that Duffy makes in stanza 1. It's interesting, given everything we've talked about gender performativity, about the importance of dress in terms of a person's identity, and about how some of the characters we've encountered in various different poems and texts through our study have had to mask their femininity in some way in order to achieve success. That again is something that Duffy references here. My breasts bandaged beneath my number 13 shirt. So she's talking about how the narrator has had to hide their breasts, hide their femininity in order to be allowed to play. Duffy again, and we've explored this through her other poems, she uses cliché quite a lot, makes reference to lots of well-known sayings. She does that here. If they thought it all over, the game was all over, it was now. So very famously, the commentator of that particular game said they think it's all over, it is now, to reference the moment that they realised that England had definitely won the World Cup. She does this to make a connection between that moment and all other moments as well. So she does that to explore the relationship between the past and the present. She also talks about how when the narrator's playing football, she danced in dazzling whites. Danced makes it seem like an easy achievement that she has secured there. And the fact that it was in dazzling whites makes reference to the fact that sometimes people think that a female being on their period might hold them back from achievements. But here that's not the case. So stanza 2 is all about rugby. And so the fact that we have the first 2 stanzas about sport, I think, is Duffy's way of commenting on society's preference for male sport. I know in the last lockdown there was a lot of uproar about the lack of female sport available to watch on television. And things like the World Cup, that happens in women's football, but it's not as televised and not as popular as men's football. Rugby in particular is an interesting sport to reference because lots of people believe that it's too rough and violent for women. And there were lots of different rules in women's rugby a while back as well, meaning that it couldn't be as full contact. And Duffy completely challenges that idea in the final line of that stanza where she says, through mouthfuls of broken teeth. Another interesting line from that stanza is where she uses the metaphor nursing the precious egg of the ball. So there for me, that's quite a maternal image linked with femininity. But for me, I think perhaps there she shows that femininity, that maternal instinct, can be used to one's advantage and can give females an advantage over men. And then stanza 3, the Fab Four, is the Beatles. So she also talks about how things like the music and entertainment industry is also dominated by men and male success. And again challenges that and says that women can do just as well. Stanza 4 then. This is all about the moon landings. And here she's trying to show that throughout history, it's mainly male achievements that are celebrated. She does that by slightly altering the cliched line, one small step for man, one giant leap for humanity. She alters it by just placing the determiner A, one small step for a man. So there she's suggesting that even in that particular line, there's a real celebration of male success with no regards for females. Again, when she says that she bounced in her moon suit over the dust, seems to trivialise the achievement, making it seem quite easy for her, showing the ease at which it could have been a female in that place. And then again, Duffy criticises the lack of importance placed upon female literature, because instead of burying a flag, the narrator decides to bury Emily Dickinson's poems. Stanza 5 then, we're back to sport, and she takes a part in a baseball match. She talks about how she uses 2 of his boxes over her chest. So the box normally would be to protect the male genitalia in such a game, and she uses it to protect her female body, suggesting that alterations can be made to games for women to play them just as easily. We also learn here that she is 5 months gone, suggesting that the narrator is pregnant. Now, sometimes for a woman, it can be a signal of a change in career, etc., a break from their career and things like that, as we've explored through Joyce and Marlene. But here Duffy shows that pregnancy is quite empowering for her narrator. So as she scores a century, she feels the first kick of her child. So her body isn't weakened by pregnancy. In fact, she feels empowered by it. We also again have the list of verbs that show that it was easy for her, looped and hooped them about like a dream. Then we've got dipped, flipped, nipped, whipped, showing that the success was quite easily achieved by a woman. In the final 2 stanzas, there's a slight change to the woman's experience, and the change occurs because she's had a child. Motherhood then kept me busy at home. And Duffy's showing how for females, the act of becoming a mother, the act of childbirth, can signal a complete change in their lives. And we've talked about that with Top Girls, about how for Marlene, for instance, she didn't feel she could have a child and achieve the same success. Joyce felt that she was limited by motherhood. And so she references that idea that society expects lots of women to change after motherhood, to take a pause in their career or to stop their career altogether. And that's what she's referencing here. The change in career comes from the fact that instead of playing sport, she was talked into management. But then Duffy again challenges that notion that that motherhood has to mean an end to those things, by saying that she gave that up and agreed on a whim to slim to the weight of a boy and become a jockey. The word whim there is quite interesting, and it's drawn attention to through the internal rhyme with slim, which shows how easy she found it to change her career at that point, and how motherhood doesn't have to be limiting for women at all, and that they can have the same success as men in spite of having a female body. The final stanza then provides a slight reflection where she starts to look back on the amazing achievements that the narrator has achieved. But the ending is left ambiguous, and again we could look at that as a similar structural technique as employed by Churchill in Top Girls. So we don't really get an answer. She says, "When I look back, what I think to myself is this," and then the poem ends. Again, allowing us to draw our own conclusions about how she feels about her success. Okay, so in today's lesson, all I really wanted was for us to read and annotate the poem and to explore the big ideas, and that was our big question for today. So I think the big ideas in this poem are that history is dominated by the celebration of male success. I think she also explores the idea that it's difficult for a woman to be recognised for their achievements. She certainly shows that women are just as capable of success as men, but equally shows that with being a woman comes a certain amount of suffering, that suffering is an inherent part of the female experience. And that big idea spans all of our texts. I think that all of the female characters that we've explored have in some way suffered as a result of their femininity. If you could just submit me a picture of your work so that I know you've made those annotations, so that I can note down who has completed the learning, that would be great. Submit it through showing my homework so I can see. Brilliant. Thank you very much.